that's why your voice is so important. That's why your point of view is so important.
Hello, and welcome back to the Wild Business Growth Podcast, presented by Hippo Direct. This is your place to hear from a new entrepreneur or innovator every single week who's unleashing creativity to grow their business. I'm your host, Max Brandstetter, digital marketing dude here at Hippo Direct. As always, you can shoot me a note at max@hippodirect.com if you would like any help with podcasting or digital marketing of your own. This is episode 27, and today we have the queen, the legendary Ann Handley. She has done more for the marketing world than I have for the corny joke industry. She has been named by IBM as one of the 7 people shaping modern marketing. She is the world's first Chief Content Officer, a title she now rocks at MarketingProfs, where she has grown it to new heights and they continue to lead the world in marketing education. And she is, of course, a best-selling author. She has a couple dynamite books, including the Wall Street Journal bestseller, Everybody Writes. And today, Everybody Podcast, so let's get into it. It's Ann Handley. Enjoy the show. Alrighty, we are here with Ann Handley, the queen of content marketing, and I think we'll just keep your title to that, Ann, because if we listed all your accolades and awards, this would be at least a week recording, maybe more. So thanks for coming on, and how you doing today, Ann?
I'm doing well. Any day that I get called a queen is always a good day. So,
oh, cool. Same here.
Yeah.
but thanks for coming on. My entire goal with this episode was just to make you laugh. So I think we're off to a hot start.
Check.
But Ann, you are an absolute legend in the marketing space and have really grown MarketingProfs to unprecedented amounts and kind of the gold standard for marketing education out there. But for anybody that is not familiar with your story, can you just give a brief background of sort of how you got started into the marketing world and what's the biggest thing you're up to today?
Sure. So I came into marketing really by way of content, which back then was called writing and journalism. And so I was a journalist. I worked for the Boston Globe. I worked freelance for so many publications. But really the link to marketing was that I was always really interested in audience, publishing so-called content, writing to engage and inform an audience in a specific way it is what I've always been about. Mm-hmm. And so the link to marketing is pretty seamless when you think about it, because in a world where that's what every marketer is trying to do, right? Engage an audience to drive a specific action, then, that's why it's so interesting to me still. So yeah, I came at it from a writing and journalism background, but it has translated, as it turns out, so seamlessly into marketing.
Okay. And today you're the Chief Content Officer of MarketingProfs, world's first Chief Content Officer.
Exactly. Yeah. It's a title that I gave myself when I started ClickZ a lifetime ago in 1997. ClickZ still publishes, but when we founded it in 1997, it was really one of the first sources of online marketing information. So we started ClickZ. I sold that 3 years later, and then I joined MarketingProfs in 2002. We started out as a publisher, just like ClickZ, just publishing information to help businesses do more with their email lists, do more with their banner ads, for example. Mm-hmm. Just do more online to really grow their own profile, to grow their own audiences. And now we've sort of morphed into marketing education and training, which is really what we've always been about. But, obviously the tools and the platforms have evolved, and our story is just so much tighter that we realized, that's really what we've always been doing. Let's just codify that in a way that actually is how now we're presenting how we describe ourselves to all businesses everywhere.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, every single business in the world at this point. But for ClickZ, let's touch on that a little bit before we get into MarketingProfs. So
sure.
That had to be nuts. I mean, sort of the stuff that you were preaching back then, which was well before the modern day social media platforms, and I'm sure much more. What was that like when you're, posting content and sort of preaching these marketing messages that were really ahead of their time?
Yeah, I mean, you're right. It was kind of crazy because that was also during the dot-com boom, right? So this was 1997
Yeah.
when, Lycos was a big deal, Netscape was a big deal. Amazon was just starting out. Their shares were crazy. There was lots and lots of activity going on. And so, we entered the space in 1997 as a way to very, very early on. I mean, I think when we sold the company, for example, 3 years into it, so just 3 years, think about that, number 1.
Yeah. Nice job, by the way.
Yeah, thank you. When we sold it, we had 50,000 subscribers, which is kind of nothing, really, compared to now. I mean, Marketing Profs has over 600,000 subscribers, right? It's not a huge
Right.
audience, but at the time, it was like we were high-fiving left and right, like, wow, we're killing it. We're so massive. But the universe was so small then, it was so tiny, and the kinds of information that we were publishing, when I look back on it now, it's sort of funny, because it would
Yeah.
be something like, making sure that every last pixel is downloaded from your banner ads, like, sort of how to solve that problem, which is something that we would never even think about now. It's not even
Right.
an issue.
Yeah. Now when I hear Pixel, I think Facebook Pixel. That's the first thing that comes to mind.
Yeah, exactly, right. But, the funny thing is that actually, as much as a lot of what we were talking about back then has gone away, it's evolved past
Hmm.
that. At the same time, I think that there are some fundamentals that exist still to this day. So things like, I think I wrote an article for ClickZ, I think in 1999-ish, something like that. And it was about the role of the chief content officer. That's a very relevant role for most businesses today.
Right. Yeah.
And so a lot of the things that we were talking about, creating great content to engage your audience, all those principles translate just as well in 2019 as they did in 1999.
So what did you learn from that ClickZ journey that helped you achieve so much success with Marketing Profs?
That's a really interesting question.
Oh, thank you.
Second laugh.
I have a tally. I have a chalkboard here that
Do
I'm
you?
just tallying it off as we're, yeah,
Yeah, that's good.
not to throw you off. But
A lot of things, I think. I mean, number one is just to stay curious about new techniques and new platforms, but with some
Mhm.
reservation, right? So don't go all in on things until you sort of play around with them a little bit, until you test them out. That's something that I learned at ClickZ. We had the first email marketing conference, for example, in 1998, I think it was.
Remember it like it was yesterday.
Yeah, exactly. I'm sure you do. Email marketing back then was something that was sort of new, and you
Right.
can say that it was necessarily experimental. But we waited until we really felt like, okay, we really understand how we can use this to help businesses, how the platform itself should be used to help businesses. So that's just one example. It's probably not the strongest example I can think of, but
Oh, that's the strongest example I've ever heard of anything ever.
thank you. All right. Well, good.
Cool. But
Um,
no, that
yeah.
was, but what, let me stumble over my words here for a second.
All right. Do you
Um,
want me to interrupt just oddly?
of course. Hey, the more odd, the merrier. I love
Oh,
it.
what?
So let's pivot to Marketing Profs. So
Mm-hmm.
I find it very interesting because you sort of have, like, when you look at your social accounts, you have the Ann Handley Twitter, which is
Yes.
fantastic, of course. And then you have the Marketing Profs Twitter, which is also Ann Handley. So
Yes.
it's kind of so I'm sure you spend maybe just a little bit of time, pumping some stuff out there and writing for the blog and all that. But you've kind of been such a great representation of Marketing Profs over the years, and you guys have grown. And you mentioned over 600,000 email subscribers.
Yes.
So, okay. Yeah, okay. So you're about halfway to Hippo Direct. But how did you get into Marketing Profs in the first place? Like how did you decide that, okay, I've kind of started my own company. I want to join and be a part of something else that's sort of growing and a little bit different?
Yeah. So Marketing Process at the time that I joined in 2002 was run by one guy, Alan Weiss, who's now
Hmm.
the CEO of Marketing Process. Funny story about that is that Alan had approached me in late 2000, maybe late 1999, early 2000, something like that. I'd have to think about that timeline a little bit. Anyway, early 2000s, say. So a couple years before I joined MarketingProfs, he had approached me when I was chief content officer at ClickZ and said, hey, I have this idea. I'd like to write a column about what marketing professionals can learn from professors. And I thought about maybe we could call it like Marketing Profs. And I literally pushed it aside on my desk and thought, that's a ridiculous idea. Why would anybody want to do that? Because who wants to read what an academic has to say? Well, fast forward 2 years, I had sold ClickZ. I took some time off. My kids were very young at the time. I just needed to decompress after the craziness that was the dot-com boom and bust timeframe.
Yeah, I'm still recovering from it.
A friend of mine told me about Alan, so I called him up and I was just like, hey, I heard that you're doing this website all on your own. It looks fantastic. I'd love to just, get together and talk to you about it, thinking that there may be an opportunity for me to take over some of the content. And Alan was like, and I'm like stroking my chin right now. He was like, so that's funny. Do you remember me? And I said, no, actually, I don't. Should I? And he's like, well, and he tells me the story. And I was like, oh my God, of course. So maybe that was the biggest thing that I learned from ClickZ, to go back to your earlier answer, which is be careful who you say no to. But anyway, we have a good laugh about that now. He ultimately, I ended up partnering, and I joined him in 2002. And the reason why I joined him was, instead of starting my own thing, was because I wanted a break, to tell you the truth. I mean, that experience of growing ClickZ was fantastic. It was really such an amazing experience to go through, in a really compressed time frame in 3 years, to go through the whole, growing a business, finding a buyer, selling it, and then working for, the new owner. It was intense. It was just really intense. And like I said, my kids were small, and I had this idea that, it might be more fun to do a kind of lifestyle business for a couple of years. So that's why I decided to join Alan. And the reason why I liked him and his website in particular was because he was really, he had a full-time job. He was working as a professor at the Marshall School at the University of Southern California. And he was not interested in the content aspect at all. So when I came in and had a conversation with him, and I said to him, what is the thing that you don't like doing the most? What's the thing that you wish you had help with? And he said, I hate the content. And I was like, okay, well, now here we go.
That's a really good question. I love that. That's a really good question to ask anyway, especially a business partner, because it just kind of naturally sets you up for a good partnership there.
Yeah, right. I mean, honestly, if he'd said content's the thing I love the most, and, I need somebody for sales, I would have been like, all right, well, I'm not your gal, but I was.
So they got out all the possible answers to that question. He said that.
Yeah, I know. That was a sort of lucky break.
And the rest is history. So we'll call it a podcast. No, I'm just kidding. But okay, so that's how you got started. If you could point to one thing or maybe a couple of things that have been most instrumental to MarketingProfs' growth over the years, what would it be? And I'm not going to let you say just the one word, content.
Oh yeah, well, that is true. So as I just said, I joined MarketingProfs because I was thinking about more of a lifestyle business. And for a year or two, it was a little, we published a weekly newsletter. We published maybe 2 articles or 3 articles maybe in each newsletter. It was very low key, and I enjoyed that a lot. But I also am not the kind of person who can sit around and just do a lifestyle business. I realized pretty quickly, and I think Alan felt the same way. So within, I'd say, a year or two, things really started to ramp up for us. A lot of things were happening too in the industry. Lots of different platforms are coming out. Blogging was a brand new thing. I was like,
I've heard of that.
yeah, exactly. I was like, I like that idea a lot. Let's see what we can do with that. So we started experimenting. We started growing the business in ways that we were just both curious about, things that we just thought were interesting. But a big breakthrough for us came in about 2006, maybe 2005, something like that. And again, I'm fuzzy on dates, but it's somewhere in the mid 2000s. And we started an online seminar program. So what would now be known as webinars, although we avoided the term webinar back then.
So that's what a webinar, it's an online seminar. How about that?
Yeah. Did you know that?
No, I did. It's just I haven't heard online seminar in so long that
Well,
it's
yeah,
like because webinars are so common now.
it is common, but we didn't call them webinars back then was because the reason why we didn't was because webinars were sort of, I don't know, almost like a disparaging, like a derogatory comment, because the idea of a webinar was that you were going to get pitch slapped. It was usually just, a very, not very informative, not very useful. It was usually just a sales pitch of some kind. And so we thought, can we reimagine that webinar, call it an online seminar, make it much more educational focused, and deliver it online, which I know sounds like so incredibly lame, but
Oh, not too
this
bad.
was not over 10 years ago. It wasn't. So we were
Right.
really one of the first organizations to consistently deliver high quality online education. That was really
Wow.
a turning point for us, because that's when we
Right.
started selling a pro membership. So we started selling
Mhm.
content that people actually would pay for, as opposed to sort of the newsletter model, which was sponsored by advertisers, right? So that's how we made our money there. We started
Right.
selling content, and that led to ultimately realizing that we were a trusted resource. People started to be aware of us more and more often, and that ultimately led to having our own event, our live event. We now have one annual event a year. We started it,
Mhm.
12 years ago, something like that. So it all cascaded from there, but it started with that one online seminar, which also known as a webinar.
Thank you for the translation, the definition there. When did you know that marketing process had become such a beast and it wasn't just, a couple year stint that had some promise? When did you know that, hey, this is going to be a real thing and really a gold standard for content?
Yeah, I would say it was roughly around that time frame. But for me personally, I mean, I think that the thing that was a turning point for me in terms of my own growth within Marketing Profs,
Yeah.
when blogging started to become more of a thing, we launched the Marketing Profs blog. It used to be called the Marketing Profs Daily Fix, MP Daily Fix. It was on a separate domain because we thought that was a good idea. It was not a good idea. We thought it was. So when individuals like you and me were able to become thought leaders, were able to become content creators, that's
Oh, thank
really
you.
that was really a turning point for me personally, and I think it also opened up new opportunities within marketing.
Right.
That ultimately led to me really going all in on content and content marketing.
Right.
Social media started to happen, and that really offered me not just a platform, but it really inspired me in ways that I just wasn't. I shouldn't say I wasn't inspired before. I mean, I was, but all this to say, I don't think I would still be in marketing today had social media not happened, had content marketing not happened, had I not read David Meerman Scott's New Rules of Marketing and PR, and a
Hmm.
light bulb went off in my head, and I was like, wow, this is what I want to do. Like, not the writing a book part, although that ultimately did happen, but really
Right.
what he talks about in that book is creating content to connect with an audience, and it's not about just pushing out your messages and interrupting through your marketing messages, but really it's much more of a cooperative concept. And so that was the book really that changed the way that I thought about marketing, and as a result really made me super excited just about what's going on in marketing today.
Well, I very humbly speak on behalf of the world and say thank you for staying in marketing. We really appreciate it.
Yeah, seriously though, I don't think I would be in marketing if it were not for David's book. And if
Wow.
anybody on this is listening now has not read it, I mean, I think it's a great foundational text to read. It's
Right.
translated into, I don't know, 1,025 different languages or something like that. I don't
Oh
know, a
my
lot of
God.
different
They
languages.
invented languages to translate it. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. It's a fantastic book, fantastic read, and it really did change my thinking. So if anybody here who's listening to this podcast has not read it, I highly encourage you to.
I'm reading it as we speak, so sorry if I get a little distracted. But how do you divide? So nowadays, you talked a little bit earlier about how you have sort of the Ann Handley accounts and then there's Marketing Prof social accounts as well. How do you divide your time between the personal brand of Ann Handley, which rhymes very well, by the way, and Marketing Profs?
The short answer is I really don't. I don't divide my time in the sense that, the way that I show up for marketing process is exactly the way that I show up for Ann Handley.
Mm-hmm.
The reason I have the Ann Handley handle, though, and the reason why I maintain it is because I fell into that marketing process handle almost by default, right? It's, I
Right.
started it way back, I think 2006, something like that, 2007. I can't remember exactly how old Twitter is, but
Everything's within a sort of a few year range about that.
yeah, I know. Like, there's a lot going on then. Max, was a
Yeah.
lot happening then.
Quite the time.
Yeah, it really was. And when I first started it, again, like I talked about the curiosity that I think I learned, that I took away from Marketing Profs. That was an example of just being really curious about how this social platform might work. And so I launched the Marketing Profs account. Just, I would use the word rogue, but it wasn't quite, because, I'm the boss. So I don't think you can be rogue if you're the
Yeah.
boss.
So your boss was okay with it.
Yeah. I was like, what do you think? And then I said, fine, let's do it. And I said, okay. So that was my permission that I
And
gave.
then you high-fived yourself.
Yeah, exactly. Just like Tina Fey style, which I want to do. So anyway, I started the account. It originally had the Marketing Profs bird on it, but then I quickly realized, again, watching, listening, waiting, looking at things from a curious standpoint is, what would be even better here is if I was actually a real person, because isn't that the promise of social media, that a
Right.
company has a face that you can actually interact with somebody? And
Mhm.
so I changed the logo to my face, and I just started using it. I had reserved the Ann Handley account just so that, some other Ann Handley out there wouldn't get it before I did. And then when I published my first book, I think that's really when I started using the Ann Handley account a little bit more, because as the Marketing Profs account has grown, I'm very aware of the fact that, yes, I'm Ann Handley on there, but I'm also representing a brand. And so I felt like that I needed to have both, to maintain the Marketing Profs account, even with my name on it. It still is, again, representing a larger community, I have a whole team of people here, right, that I'm
Right.
representing. But, that said, I mean, anything could happen. So it's always good to have, make sure you have your own names as well.
Mhm.
Can you imagine getting a 100% open rate on your next marketing message? Well, you can with extra large postcards that are impossible to ignore. Hippo Direct can help you find the perfect list of proven direct mail responders. We can even help lay out and design the postcard for you. Check us out at hippodirect.com.
Let's get to that book. And I find this really fascinating because you mentioned that when you read David Meerman Scott's book, the
Mm-hmm.
light bulb exploded in your head.
Mm-hmm.
It was all about marketing, and writing really wasn't on your radar. So how the hell did you end up writing a book about writing?
Well, before I did the book about writing, so before I did Everybody Writes, I did Content Rules. And
Mhm.
Content Rules, David Meerman Scott wrote the foreword to that. He introduced me to Wiley, to his publisher. And I wrote that book essentially to go a little bit deeper into some of the topics that David talked about in New Rules of Marketing and PR, specifically creating content to engage an audience. What does that look like? How do you do it? How do you approach it? And so that was really my first foray into publishing. Certainly, it was my first book, but at the same time, I was also trying to figure out what my message was, and in some ways packaging the notion of content marketing. Content marketing is sort of a huge topic, right?
Right. Yeah, some would say.
Yeah, and so I couldn't get too deep into writing, although, as we talked about, my background is as a writer and as a journalist. And so I
Right.
truly think of, that's how I show up, right? That's how I communicate best.
Mhm.
So Content Rules was a much broader look at, we talked about writing in there, but really we talked about creating content to engage audiences. 4 years later, I thought, what's really missing in the world is a sort of elements of style, E.B. Strunk and White's elements of style. What's really missing is that for a content marketing age. And as a writer, I really wanted to not just give marketers a guide to writing in a content marketing age, but I also wanted to make them excited about it. Like, I wanted to write a fun book about writing, because I thought, why does everybody hate writing so much? Why does everyone think of writing as so terrible, so boring, so painful? So I thought, what can I offer the marketing world? Like, what can I offer businesses to address that problem? And so that's where Everybody Writes came from.
Oh, okay. So Everybody Writes. It's a Wall Street Journal bestseller. And obviously it's about writing. You could guess that from the title.
Because everybody does, yes.
Exactly. Everybody guesses it too. But today, so right now, at the time of this recording, with so many different social media platforms and content marketing kind of getting bigger and bigger every year, why is writing so important today?
Because to me, writing is still the backbone of communication. It's still the backbone of so much of the content that marketers are creating. It's so much of the way that businesses are communicating. It's in every email that we send. It'll be in the podcast. Whatever text is around the podcast. That when you publish and promote this, social media is writing. Everything that we do has some element of writing to it. And I think most companies aren't really considering it to the way that they should. They're not thinking about, things like, how do we actually tell a story, for example? How do we actually use our tone of voice to greater effect? One of the things that I always talk to companies about, and I've said this on stage a million times, is if you cover up the logo on your website, on your social channels, do you sound different, or do you sound like another company? Do you sound like a competitor?
Right.
So how can you actually be communicating in a way that's lively and vivid and clear? And at the same time, how can businesses really embrace that clear opportunity that I think to tell a different story, to sound different than anybody else?
Yeah, I love that. And it's kind of funny. I know you're sort of a Twitter super user, and I love Twitter, and it's fun. A lot of my close friends don't really tweet anymore, and that's just kind of happened over time. But I've noticed some people jumping back into it. But I've always loved Twitter, and I think part of that is because I really love the written word and sort of how creative you can be just with text. And now, obviously, all the platforms are getting more visual. But I initially was resistant to joining Instagram because I love Twitter so much. And I was like, oh, I don't want to look at pictures all the time. I like when people, make puns and witty tweets and that sort of thing. And obviously now I'm on Instagram and, probably the biggest account of all time. But I love your approach to that because it is so important to be clever and smart with your writing because that's what we're doing all the time now. It's how we communicate, especially on the online world now.
Yeah.
Let's just say for a beginner, for someone that hasn't written a novel yet, what's one tip that you would share for starting this beast of writing a novel?
God, that's a tough question in a way. There's so many directions I could go with that.
Yeah, you might know a thing or two about writing, but well, we could just make it about a book or even a long blog post. What's something that's important to keep in mind whenever you're about to start writing sort of this big piece that you're going to share around?
I think the biggest thing is to not be afraid of it, really. I mean, so I think the thing that stopped me when you asked me the novel question is because I feel like most people who are going to write a novel are probably already writers in a way, where they sort of already consider themselves.
They've already written a novel by the time I answered that question.
Yeah, I don't know. It's funny. So I think that was the thing that gave me pause in that question. But I think, so here's the deal. Like, I think a lot of companies, a lot of marketers, a lot of businesses, they feel like they have to communicate in a certain way. And a lot of PR and marketing people that I talk to have developed what I call their marketing voice. And what that means is it's kind of like when you're on a phone call in the car, and like there are passengers in the car with you, the way you sound on that phone call is a little stilted, a little different. It's not you, but it's not as comfortable and as freewheeling and as loose as you might be if you were alone in the car, right?
Right, and it doesn't sound as amazing as we sound right now.
Yeah, exactly, because it's just you and me. We're not thinking about the audience per se, right? And so I think it's incumbent on PR and marketing professionals and businesses more broadly to really be communicating in that same effort, right? To really think about how can we actually communicate in a looser tone. Don't use your marketing voice. Don't sit down and think about or stress too much about sounding professional. I think it's much more important to sound authentic, to sound like you. That to me is what a lot of companies are missing.
Mm-hmm.
What I was going to say about Instagram too, sorry, I just was thinking because you were talking about, writing. And I think every place that you communicate, every social channel is an opportunity to use that voice, to use your tone of voice. And I was thinking about when you were mentioning Instagram a second ago, there's a photographer who read my book, who read Everybody Writes. She's on Instagram. And the way she writes her captions on Instagram, somewhere along the way, I got connected with her. And so I follow her on Instagram. The way she writes her captions are so engaging and they're so fun. And she really tells a story about each photo that she takes. She tells the backstory on what's going on. She photographs families and children a lot of times. But she's awesome. She's hilarious. One day I reached out to her, and I didn't know that she'd read my book, by the way. And I said, I really love the way that you are a visual communicator. She's a photographer. And I said, I love the way that the stories that you tell on here are so interesting and so different. And you don't sound like any other photographer out there. I just wanted to tell you that. And she said, I can't believe you said this to me. You completely changed how I approach my Instagram after I read Everybody Writes. And I was like mind blown, because I was like, yes, this is exactly why I wrote that book. Because sure, it'll help any business, but the fact that it helped this one woman communicate in a way that was so unique and so interesting, I love the way she approaches her Instagram now. It's completely changed her business, and it was all in the stories that she's telling there. It's how she's writing.
Wow. Okay, so let's move to a segment on inspiration and creativity for a little bit, which is so important in the business world, and especially the writing world. First question here is, what do you do to stay creative?
I read a lot of books all the time. I don't read a lot of business books. I read a lot of fiction. I read a lot of nonfiction, just to keep myself sharp in that way. And that's how I stay inspired. I also walk my dog every day, and just getting outside, getting away from my desk. I'm a little bit of a workaholic. I love working, so I hate using the word workaholic, because that makes it sound like it's drudgery, but I really love working. That's what I love to do.
Right. You have to.
Yeah, but getting outside every day, no matter how bitterly cold it is in Boston, I get out every single day for at least an hour, and it just clears my head. It helps me reframe my priorities, and it really does help my creativity as well.
Yeah, I'm right there with you. I work from home as well, and I have to make a point every afternoon to go for a walk outside. We got a nice little park across from my apartment here, and sometimes I go to different parts of the city. But it's so important, especially when you're inside all day. And I know. So on that note, you work from home. Do you still work from home?
Yes, I do. I built a tiny house in my backyard because the working from home thing can get old sometimes. So I switch up my venue by crossing my backyard, going out to my tiny house, and I work out of there sometimes. I can't stand working out of coffee shops or lunch places or Starbucks or places where a lot of my friends who work from home go. The sound drives me crazy. I don't like having people around. I like silence. So it's a problem too when my family is around, because I like being upstairs. I don't like anybody breathing near me. So
sorry for that.
Yeah. Well, no, when I'm working, I mean, so if you were in my family, that would get to be a problem, because they apparently like to breathe. So yeah, so I built this tiny house in my backyard. Noted. Which is fantastic. It's the best thing I ever did, because it allows me to be home without necessarily being home. It also gives me an opportunity to change up my surroundings whenever I feel like I need it. You know how sometimes you get stuck, you're working on something, you'll be writing something, and you sort of get to that point where it's like, ugh. So, what I often will do is just take a trek to the backyard, walk across the lawn, plug my laptop in out there, and it just often will just reboot my day.
Well, somehow you read my mind, because I was just thinking about writer's block and how it's kind of a common thing, but maybe a mythological thing. But you kind of gave some answers right there of how you would break that and sort of clear your head.
Yeah.
So get out of my mind. And then, do you have any tips on working from home besides having a tiny house? In addition to that.
Oh yeah, step 1, build a tiny house. Step 1, procure yard. Step 2, build tiny house. Let me think about that. Tips for working from home. This is going to sound really lame, but get dressed. It's like,
yes. Oh, what? I'll be back.
Yeah. Okay.
I'm just kidding.
Aren't you cold?
Always.
Yeah. I used to not get dressed, and the kids, like when my kids were younger, when they were in school, the school bus would pull up, and I would still be sitting there sometimes in my, pajamas that when they'd left the house. I was still sitting there like, Mom, what did you do all day? But I've changed it up since then. Every day I get dressed, which sounds so lame, but I do think it puts you in the mindset to sort of do the job that you need to do. When I stay in my pajamas all day, I just start to feel like, I don't know, like just sluggish and not ready to take on the world. You can't take on the world in your pajamas, you just can't. So
Yeah, it feels like your day hasn't started yet if you don't get dressed,
Yeah,
which is why I
yeah.
wear a very expensive tuxedo every single day. let's move to let's move to a fan favorite section called the Wild Business Shout Out of the Week.
The Wild Business Shout Out of the Week.
So this is a section where we talk about a recent marketing campaign or something that a cool marketing company or business is doing to cut our attention. And earlier you mentioned a specific newsletter that you're a big fan of. Can you say what it is and speak about it for a little bit?
Sure. So my favorite business-to-business newsletter, I'm a big fan of newsletters more broadly. I think they're vastly undervalued by a lot of companies who are chasing audience on Facebook and LinkedIn and Instagram, and they're not really thinking about the platform that they own, which is your database, which is your email list.
Right.
So the campaign, so-called, that's really more of a commitment. It's not a campaign, is a newsletter that's published by CB Insights. CB Insights is a tech data company. The newsletter that they publish is fantastic. It comes from the CEO, a guy by the name of Anand Sanwal, also in New York City, I think not too far away from you.
Oh yeah, we're roommates.
Yeah. Tell him I said hi.
Okay, cool. We'll get him on for the second part. No.
And I love what they're doing. It's a fantastic resource for anybody who's interested in the technology space in particular. But more than that, they're also using it as a way to drive business. And there's a couple reasons why I really love it. First of all, we talked on this podcast a little bit about tone of voice and writing. Obviously, it's a written newsletter, but Anand uses tone of voice to great effect. That newsletter feels different. It feels like it comes from him because it does come from him. It's a little snarky, it's funny, it's hilarious, it's a little edgy. And those are words that you wouldn't necessarily associate with any kind of data tech newsletter. But this one, hell yeah, it's great. So highly encourage you to check it out if you are looking for any inspiration for your own email newsletters, if you run a B2B company.
Always.
Fantastic resource. So that's my shout out.
Perfect. Okay, cool. That's a really good one. I'll make sure to check it out right after this. Always looking for email newsletter inspiration, so appreciate it. That's a really good point on tone of voice. And to commend you, I think what I've noticed in your writing is, well, one, you can always identify it's you. Like, it's always so personal and honest and authentic. But in terms of your social media accounts, like, just shout out your Instagram, your posts and your captions and your stories are so fun. Like, everything you have on there is so fun, and you really convey that vibe. And so you've been really consistent with it, and it's just really, really fun to see what you keep pumping out there. So
Yeah, thank you. Thanks.
of course, no
I really
problem.
appreciate that. And the funny thing is, so we talked earlier about, just keeping that sense of curiosity and inspiration. I mean,
Hmm.
Instagram for me does drive some business sometimes, but my goal there is really just fun. I mean, I love Instagram, and I love it just because there's no pressure. It's just kind of a fun place that I go to post photos to really give people a sense of who I am, like, not as a business, not as at MarketingProfs, but just as me. This is my life, this is my dog, these are my kids, this is,
Right.
my face is a cookie cutter, so so that kind of stuff is just sort of fun. I just post on there whatever delights me, and I think that is not a terrible way to approach your
No,
marketing more broadly.
no. I think that's an amazing approach, because what delights you is sure to delight many others as well.
Yeah, and it's the same approach that I take with my own email newsletter too, which I just started at the
Mhm.
beginning of 2018. So I've been publishing it now just for a
Uh,
year, and I take that same approach there too. In a way, my approach with Instagram has helped me just kind of lighten up my own voice and to have some fun. And I find that the more that I do that, the more that people actually respond. I
oh,
can't
okay. Yeah.
say that any of us has anything unique to add. I mean, I think there is so much information in the world already that very often for you to contribute something truly unique is pretty rare. But what you can do is give your take on it, your spin. That's why your voice is so important. That's why your point of view is so important.
And that newsletter is Anarchy, correct? With the pun
Yeah.
for Ann.
Yep. AnnHandley.com/newsletter.
appreciate the pun with Anne. So
I'm all about puns. I love puns.
me too. That's part of why I fell in love with Twitter in the first place, is I would just tweet puns out in college and my roommates would be like, dude, what are you doing? But
Really? Oh, that's awesome.
no, but okay, I know we only got a little bit of time. I want to wrap up here with some real quick rapid fire Q&A. Are you ready for it?
I'm ready.
All right, let's get wild. These are going to be some very weird questions, so I hope you're ready. All right, what is your favorite word, like a favorite single word?
Shenanigan. Did I say that too fast? Should I have waited?
No, that works. Yeah, I was guessing you were going to say that. What's your most unique talent? Like something that's completely random that most people wouldn't know.
Oh, I am the world's best parallel parker.
Really?
Yeah, I bragged about this on my Instagram story yesterday. Did you see that?
I did. Yeah. Did you get a ruler out to make sure that both tires were?
Dude, did you see that? That was like 3
That was
inches
impressive. Yeah.
from the curb.
I can vouch for this. That and that's something so many people have problems with too.
Yeah, it's true. And that was a left-hand turn. I'm much better on the right, but the curb was on the left this time. So I was particularly proud of that one. I would say that it was an anomaly, that I don't do it all the time, but dude, I nail it. I love parallel parking. I'm so good at it. I don't particularly like driving all that much, but I am such a great parallel parker.
Oh, well, so now we know if you didn't go down the marketing path, you would have been a valet person.
I'm gonna put that on my resume. Seeking
Awesome.
valet opportunities.
Cool. All right, I'll take any royalties from that. But if you had to eat the same thing for every meal for the rest of your life, what would that be?
Yogurt.
Yogurt. Okay, cool. And if you had to listen to the same song every single time you listen to music for the rest of your life, what song would that be?
Oh, happy birthday, because then it would be my birthday.
Very clever. Wow. Okay. Well, happy birthday. And
Thank you.
Thank you so much. And this has been a blast. It's been so fun. And thank you for sharing your wisdom and all your great lessons about marketing and writing and parallel parking and beyond. I really appreciate you coming on. What is the best place for people to connect with you?
At AnneHandley.com, you'll get to me directly, or go to MarketingProfs. And if you are interested in not getting to me directly, but hearing a lot about marketing, training, and education.
Perfect. Okay. And then last thing here, the stage is yours. What are your final thoughts? Anything you want to close this out?
Oh, man, I just really appreciate this opportunity. I do a lot of podcasts all the time, but I got to say, Max, this was probably one of the most fun podcasts I've been on. So I really, really appreciate the opportunity.
Oh, thank you so much. And that was, I really appreciate that. It means a lot. And it's very on brand for you being fun. So
well, thank you. Thanks.
And it's very on brand for me being corny. So
some say on brand, some say on Brandstetter. It is a very, very common saying. Trust me on this one. Thank you so much, Anne. Really appreciate you coming on. This was truly amazing. Everybody out there, make sure to sign up for Anne's newsletter. All you got to do is go to annehandley.com/newsletter. Put in your name and email, hit that beautiful button there. She calls it Total Anarchy. That's ANN in anarchy. Get it? Huh? Make sure you sign up for her newsletter first, and after that, if you're feeling nice, sign up to the Hippo Digest. It is your weekly recap of creative marketing. We scour the web for all the coolest creative marketing and advertising campaigns out there. You can make the most of this podcast experience by checking out our blog at hippodirect.com/blog, including the favorite books of podcast guests, the favorite podcasts of podcast guests, and there's much, much more where that came from. Soak up all the Hippo fun at Hippo Direct on your favorite social media platform. And my personal account is Max Brandstetter. And as always, if you're not subscribed to this podcast already, make sure to do so on your favorite audio platform and leave us a 5-star review on Apple Podcasts. That is all for this week. Until next time, let your business run wild. Bring on the bongos!